You must listen to me. This stays between us, understood? If anyone asks, we were never here.
The conference room at St. Catherine's Medical Center had never felt this cold. 12 members of the hospital's ethics board sat in silence as the IT technician queued up the security footage. Dr. Marcus Holloway, chief of cardiothoracic surgery for 17 years, sat rigid in his chair, his attorney whispering urgently in his ear. Across the wide mahogany table, Emma Rodriguez sat with her hands folded, her spine straight, her eyes clear. 6 months ago, she wouldn't have recognized this version of herself, this woman who could sit in a room with the man who'd made her dread coming to work and not look away. 6 months ago, she'd been terrified. 6 months ago, she'd been silent. The screen flickered to life, showing the empty fourth-floor corridor outside the cardiac supply room. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. The board members leaned forward. Emma's best friend and fellow nurse, Sarah Chen, reached under the table and squeezed her hand once. On the screen, two figures appeared in the hallway. Even in grainy black and white, what happened next was unmistakable. The board chairman cleared his throat and paused the video. He didn't need to see more. No one in that room needed to see more. Dr. Holloway's face had drained of color. His attorney was already packing his briefcase, a silent acknowledgement of a battle that couldn't be won. The chairman's voice cut through the tension like a scalpel. Dr. Holloway, this board has seen enough. We'll be recommending immediate termination and reporting this incident to the state medical board, the police, and the district attorney's office. But to understand how we got to this moment, this reckoning, this justice, this ending that became Emma's new beginning, we need to go back 6 months, to the day Emma Rodriguez walked into St. Catherine's believing she'd found her dream job. This is a story about courage in the face of power. This is a story about the moment one woman decided that staying silent was no longer an option. This is a story about what happens when predators in positions of authority forget that evidence doesn't lie, and justice, though sometimes delayed, can be delivered. If you support survivors who speak up and fight for what's right, if you believe in accountability and systemic change, subscribe to the Medical Files. Let's begin. Emma Rodriguez had wanted to be a nurse since she was 8 years old, watching the ICU staff at County General save her grandmother's life after a massive stroke. She remembered their efficiency, their compassion, their calm in the chaos. By the time she graduated from nursing school at the top of her class, her grandmother had passed, but Emma carried her memory into every shift, every patient interaction, every moment she'd chosen this profession over anything else. At 29, Emma had 7 years of experience in critical care nursing, including 3 years in a Level 1 trauma center. She was the nurse doctors requested by name, the one families thanked in tearful handwritten notes, the one who could spot a patient's decline before the monitors even registered it. When St. Catherine's Medical Center in downtown Philadelphia offered her a position in their prestigious cardiac unit, it felt like validation. St. Catherine's wasn't just any hospital. It was where the best came to work. It was where careers were made. Her first week confirmed everything she'd hoped. The cardiac unit ran like a well-oiled machine, with 20 beds, state-of-the-art equipment, and a team of nurses who actually seemed to like each other. Sarah Chen, a nurse her own age with a quick wit and an impressive collection of colorful scrubs, adopted Emma immediately, showing her the best spots for coffee, the supply closets with the good IV catheters, and which attendings actually listened when nurses spoke. "You're going to love it here," Sarah told her on day 3 as they charted side by side at the nurses' station. "The unit manager actually respects us. The residents don't have God complexes, and the cardiothoracic team is incredible. Dr. Holloway has been here forever, basically built the cardiac surgery program from nothing. He's intense, but he's brilliant." Emma had already seen Dr. Marcus Holloway from a distance, a tall man in his mid-50s with silver hair, an expensive watch, and the kind of confident stride that came from decades of being the most important person in any room. His accolades were legendary, published in every major cardiology journal, keynote speaker at national conferences, credited with developing a valve replacement technique that had become the gold standard. The hallway outside the cardiac surgical suite had a photo wall celebrating the program's 20th anniversary, and Dr. Holloway's face appeared in nearly every picture. Emma's first direct interaction with him came during morning rounds 2 weeks in. She was checking vitals on Mr. Patterson, a 62-year-old post-op coronary bypass patient, when Dr. Holloway swept into the room with 3 residents trailing behind him. "Talk to me," Dr. Holloway said, eyes on the patient's chart, not acknowledging Emma's presence. She delivered a crisp, thorough report. Vitals stable, chest tube output minimal, pain controlled, patient ambulating with physical therapy. Dr. Holloway asked 2 follow-up questions about the patient's cardiac rhythm, which Emma answered precisely. He nodded, made a notation, and moved to leave. As he passed her, he said, "Good work, Nurse Rodriguez, keep it up." It was a small acknowledgement, but it felt like passing a test. Sarah high-fived her at lunch. "See, told you. If Holloway remembers your name this fast, it means you're good. He doesn't waste brain space on people who don't matter." Over the next month, Emma settled into the rhythm of cardiac nursing. The work was demanding but rewarding. She loved the precision of post-operative care, the way she could watch patients who'd been wheeled out of the OR barely conscious walk out of the unit a week later with new futures ahead of them. She loved her colleagues, the dark humor that got them through the hard shifts, the way they covered for each other, the potlucks and birthday celebrations that made them feel like family. Dr. Holloway occasionally stopped to compliment her work, always in that same brisk, professional manner. "Nice catch on Mr. Diaz's arrhythmia. Your charting is thorough. Good instincts." Emma appreciated the recognition. In a profession where nurses were often invisible to doctors, being seen felt like respect. But then subtle things started to shift. It began with his eyes. Emma first noticed it during rounds in late October, when Dr. Holloway asked her about a patient's lab results, and his gaze dropped from her face to her body for just a beat too long before returning to the chart. She felt it like a physical touch, uncomfortable and unwelcome. She pushed the feeling away. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe she was being oversensitive. A few days later, he came to the nurse's station while she was restocking the medication cart. The station was empty except for the 2 of them, the rest of the team at lunch. Dr. Holloway leaned against the counter, closer than necessary. "Emma," he said, using her first name for the first time, "you settling in okay?" "Yes, Dr. Holloway, thank you." "You're doing excellent work, really excellent. I've been impressed." He paused, his eyes traveling over her face. "You're different from most of the nurses here. You've got something special." The compliment should have felt good, but it didn't. There was something in his tone, something in the way he'd positioned himself between her and the exit, that made her pulse quicken, not in a good way. "I appreciate that, Dr. Holloway. If you'll excuse me, I need to check on my patients." She moved to step past him. He didn't move immediately, forcing her to squeeze by closer than she wanted. As she passed, she felt his hand brush her lower back, lingering a moment too long to be accidental. Emma spent the rest of the shift replaying the interaction in her mind. Had that actually been inappropriate, or was she reading too much into a casual touch? Dr. Holloway was known for being friendly with staff. Maybe this was just his management style. Maybe she was making something out of nothing. She mentioned it to Sarah during their drive home, trying to sound casual. "Has Dr. Holloway ever seemed, I don't know, overly friendly to you?" Sarah glanced over, eyebrows raised. "Holloway, not really. He's always been strictly professional with me." "Why?" Emma hesitated. "No reason. Just trying to get a read on everyone's personalities still." But the incidents didn't stop. They escalated in frequency and in boldness, each one individually deniable but collectively forming a pattern Emma couldn't ignore. Dr. Holloway started finding reasons to interact with her when she was alone. He'd appear in the supply room when she went to restock, in the break room when she took lunch at odd hours, in the stairwell when she used the stairs instead of the elevator. Each time he'd stand too close, compliment something personal, her perfume, her hair, how the scrubs fit her, things that had nothing to do with her work. The comments grew more pointed. You know, Emma, you're wasted in floor nursing. You should think about going back to school, becoming a nurse practitioner. I could mentor you. We could work closely together. The way he said closely made her skin crawl. Then came the text messages. Dr. Holloway got her number from the staff directory, claiming he needed to reach her about patient care issues. The first few messages were legitimate questions about a patient's medication schedule, a heads-up about an incoming surgery. But then they came at odd hours, 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. Can't stop thinking about that catch you made with Mrs. Liu today. You're really something. 11:30 on a Saturday night. Hope you're not working too hard. Someone as talented as you deserves to enjoy life more. Emma's stomach twisted every time his name appeared on her phone. She kept the messages brief and professional, never responding to anything personal, but he didn't take the hint. The moment everything changed happened on a cold November evening. Emma had stayed late to complete charting after a particularly difficult shift. 2 patients had coded within an hour of each other, and she was exhausted, running on coffee and adrenaline. The unit was quiet, most of the day's shift gone, the night crew just starting to settle in. She was alone at the nurse's station when Dr. Holloway appeared, still in his scrubs from a long surgery. Emma, can I see you in my office for a moment? I need to discuss your performance evaluation. Performance evaluations weren't scheduled for another month, but refusing would seem insubordinate. Emma followed him down the hall to his office, a spacious corner room lined with diplomas and awards. He closed the door behind them. That was when her heart began to race. Have a seat, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Emma remained standing. Dr. Holloway, if this is about my performance, I'd prefer to have this conversation with my unit manager present. His smile didn't reach his eyes. There's no need for that. This is informal. I just wanted to tell you that I've noticed your work, Emma. Really noticed. You're exceptional, and I think we could have a very beneficial relationship. I can open doors for you here. I can make sure your career goes exactly where you want it to go. He moved closer, his voice dropping lower. But relationships like this require trust, mutual understanding, discretion. The implications were crystal clear, wrapped in professional language that would be deniable if she ever repeated it. Emma's mind raced. She needed to get out of this office. She needed to get away from him. I appreciate your confidence in my work, Dr. Holloway, but I'm not interested in any relationship beyond professional colleagues. If you'll excuse me. She moved toward the door. He stepped in front of it, not touching her but blocking her path. The smile was gone now, replaced with something harder. You're misunderstanding me, Emma. I'm offering you an opportunity. A smart woman would recognize that. A smart woman would understand that making the chief of surgery happy is how you succeed here. He paused, letting that sink in. And a smart woman would also understand that making the chief of surgery unhappy can have consequences. There it was, not even veiled anymore. A threat delivered with the calm confidence of a man who'd never faced consequences for anything in his life. Emma's hands were shaking, but she forced her voice to stay steady. I need to leave now, Dr. Holloway. Please move. For one terrible moment she thought he wouldn't. Then he stepped aside with an exaggerated gesture of courtesy. Of course. Think about what I said, Emma. Think carefully. She walked out of that office on legs that barely held her, made it to her car in the parking garage, and sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes, shaking. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Holloway. I hope you'll reconsider. We could be very good together, but if you're not interested, I understand. I just hope you won't do anything foolish that might jeopardize your position here. Hospitals talk. Reputations matter. Think about that. Emma drove home in a daze, the threat echoing in her mind. She'd worked so hard to get to St. Catherine's. Her reputation was impeccable. And now this man, this powerful man who controlled staffing decisions and had the ear of hospital administration, was telling her to comply or face consequences. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to quit. But she needed this job. She had student loans, rent, car payments. The nursing job market was competitive. If Dr. Holloway made calls to other hospitals, spread rumors about her being difficult or unprofessional, she might not find another position at this level. Powerful doctors could end nursing careers with a few strategic phone calls. Emma had seen it happen to others. That night she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, heard his voice. We could be very good together. The nausea rose in waves. This was wrong. This was illegal. This was harassment and intimidation and abuse of power. But what could she do? Who would believe her over Dr. Marcus Holloway, the legendary cardiac surgeon, the man whose name was on half the plaques in the hospital? The next morning she called in sick. Then the next day. Sarah texted asking if she was okay. Emma lied, said she had the flu. On the third day, Sarah showed up at her apartment with soup and concern. Okay, what's actually going on? And don't tell me it's the flu. You look like you haven't slept in days. Emma broke the whole store. Why came pouring out? The looks, the touches, the comments, the text messages, the meeting in the office, the threat. Sarah listened, her expression moving from concern to fury. Emma, that's sexual harassment. That's textbook. What he did is illegal. I know, Emma whispered. But it's my word against his. He's the chief of surgery. He'll say I misunderstood, that he was being friendly, that I'm exaggerating. And then I'll be the nurse who accused Dr. Holloway and my career will be over. Sarah grabbed her hands. Listen to me. You're not the first. There's no way you're the first. Men like that don't just wake up one day and decide to harass someone. This is a pattern. There have been others. Even if there are, they probably stayed silent for the same reasons I want to. He has all the power, Sarah. What am I supposed to do? You document everything. You report it. You fight back. Sarah's voice was fierce. Because if you don't, he'll do this to someone else. Maybe someone younger, someone with less experience, someone who has even fewer resources to fight. You have to stop him. Emma wanted to argue, wanted to explain why it was impossible, but something in Sarah's words struck deep. If she stayed silent, there would be another nurse in 6 months, a year, 5 years, sitting in a car shaking after leaving his office. Another woman getting threatening texts. Another career held hostage by a predator who'd learned that power meant he could do whatever he wanted. I don't know if I can do this, Emma admitted. You don't have to do it alone, Sarah said firmly. I'll help you. We'll figure this out together. That conversation became Emma's turning point. Over the following week, she and Sarah researched everything: hospital policies on harassment, federal employment laws, legal options, victim advocacy resources. Emma learned about Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, about hostile work environment claims, about the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. She learned that Pennsylvania was a one-party consent state, meaning she could legally record conversations without the other person's knowledge. She started documenting everything with forensic precision. She created a password-protected document logging every interaction with Dr. Holloway: dates, times, locations, exactly what was said, whether there were witnesses. She screenshotted every text message he sent. She backed everything up to the cloud and emailed copies to herself. Sarah helped her research Dr. Holloway's history. They found something that made Emma's blood run cold. 3 years ago, a nurse named Jessica Tran had left St. Catherine's abruptly mid-contract and moved across the country. They found Jessica on LinkedIn, and Emma sent a carefully worded message. 2 days later, Jessica called her. He did the same thing to me, Jessica said, her voice tight with old pain. The comments, the touching, the late-night texts, the meeting in his office where he made it clear what he wanted. I reported it to HR. They did an investigation that consisted of asking him if it was true, him denying everything, and then suggesting that maybe I'd misinterpreted friendly mentorship. Within a month, my shifts were cut. I was written up for minor mistakes, and the other surgeons stopped requesting me. The message was clear: shut up or get pushed out. I left because I couldn't take it anymore. Did anyone else report him? Emma asked. I don't know for sure, but I heard rumors. A resident a few years before me supposedly filed a complaint and then transferred to another program. A surgical tech who suddenly quit. Nobody talks about it openly because he's untouchable. St. Catherine's treats him like royalty because he brings in millions in surgical revenue. The hospital protects him. After that call, Emma knew what she had to do. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about Jessica, about the resident, about the surgical tech, about every person who'd suffered and stayed silent because the system failed them. This was about making sure there wasn't another victim after her. But knowing what she should do and having the courage to do it were different things. For another 2 weeks, Emma went back to work, kept her head down, and avoided Dr. Holloway as much as possible. He seemed to sense her distance and didn't push, but his presence hung over her like a storm cloud. Every day she walked into that hospital, anxiety twisted in her chest. Then, one evening in early December, Emma witnessed something that cemented her resolve. She was restocking supplies in the fourth-floor storage room when she heard voices from the hallway. One was Dr. Holloway. The other was Megan, a new nurse who'd started just 3 weeks ago, fresh out of school and eager to impress. Emma couldn't see them, but she could hear every word through the partially open door. "You're doing great work, Megan, really great. I wanted to tell you that I've noticed you." The same words, same tone, the same predatory script. "Oh, thank you, Dr. Holloway. That means a lot. You should stop by my office sometime. We could talk about your career development. I mentor nurses who show promise. We could work together very closely." Emma's hands clenched around the box of IV supplies she was holding. He was doing it again. Already. To someone barely out of school who probably idolized him, who wouldn't know how to recognize the warning signs, who would blame herself when things escalated. Not this time. Emma stepped out of the storage room. "Dr. Holloway, I need to speak with you about the Patterson case. It's urgent." He turned, surprise flashing across his face when he saw her. Megan looked relieved at the interruption and excused herself quickly. Dr. Holloway's eyes narrowed. "What's urgent about Patterson?" "Nothing, but I needed to interrupt that conversation." His expression went cold. "You're overstepping, Nurse Rodriguez." "No, Dr. Holloway, you're overstepping, and it's going to stop." She walked away before he could respond, her heart hammering but her resolve solidified. That night, Emma contacted an employment attorney whose name she'd found through a victims' advocacy organization. The lawyer, Patricia Morgan, listened to her story and looked through her documentation. "You have a strong case," Patricia said. "The text messages alone constitute harassment and the threat about your job is textbook retaliation. But I want to be honest with you, Emma. This will be difficult. He'll have expensive lawyers. The hospital will try to protect itself. This could take months or years. Are you prepared for that?" "I'm prepared to make sure he never does this to anyone else," Emma said. "Then let's build a case he can't deny." Over the next week, Patricia coached Emma on evidence gathering. The key would be getting Dr. Holloway on record making another inappropriate advance or threat. Emma was terrified at the thought of deliberately putting herself in that position, but she understood the legal reality. Her word against his wouldn't be enough, especially when the hospital had institutional reasons to side with him. She needed proof that was undeniable. Patricia suggested that Emma trigger another interaction by sending Dr. Holloway a text saying she wanted to discuss his offer from the office meeting. The text was carefully worded to be ambiguous enough that it wouldn't incriminate Emma, but specific enough that Dr. Holloway would understand what she meant. His response came within minutes. "I'm glad you've reconsidered. Come to my office tomorrow at 11 p.m. We'll have privacy to discuss this properly. 11 p.m., when the halls would be empty, when there would be no witnesses. The manipulation was blatant. He wanted her isolated and vulnerable. Emma felt sick reading it, but she also felt a grim satisfaction. He was so confident in his power, so certain he'd won, that he wasn't even being careful anymore. The next evening, Emma prepared like she was going into battle. She charged her phone fully and tested the voice recording app 3 times. She wore scrubs with a chest pocket where the phone would sit securely with the microphone pointing upward. She told Sarah exactly where she'd be and when, with instructions to call the police if Emma didn't text her by 11:30. Sarah wanted to come with her, wanted to stand outside the office door, but they both knew that would make Dr. Holloway suspicious. "I'll be fine," Emma said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I just need him to repeat what he said before. Once I have that on tape, Patricia can use it. And if he tries something, then I run, and we call the police immediately." At 10:55 p.m., Emma walked through the nearly empty cardiac unit toward Dr. Holloway's office. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Her footsteps echoed on the linoleum. She pressed the record button on her phone app and knocked on his door. "Come in." Dr. Holloway sat behind his desk, looking relaxed and confident. He gestured for her to close the door. Emma left it slightly ajar, positioning herself near the exit. "I'm glad you came around, Emma. I knew you were smart enough to see this the right way." His voice was smooth, already victorious. "We can have a very mutually beneficial arrangement. You'll find I'm generous with nurses who understand how things work." "And how do things work, Dr. Holloway?" Emma kept her voice steady, though her pulse was racing. "You be available when I need you. You're discreet. And in return, I make sure your career here flourishes. Better shifts, better assignments, recommendations for advancement. It's simple." "And if I'm not interested?" His smile faded. "Then you'll find that St. Catherine's isn't the right fit for you. Nurses who don't work well with the surgical team tend to struggle here. Mistakes get noticed. Performance reviews suffer. References become lukewarm. You understand what I'm saying?" "NG. You're saying you'll retaliate against me professionally if I don't comply with your sexual demands." He stood abruptly, his expression darkening. "Don't put words in my mouth. I'm offering you a professional mentorship with benefits if you're going to be hysterical and mischaracterize." "I'm not mischaracterizing anything. You've been sexually harassing me for 2 months. You cornered me in this office and threatened my career. You're doing it again right now, and this needs to stop." Dr. Holloway moved around the desk toward her, and Emma's hand went to the door handle. He stopped, seeing her ready to bolt, and his expression shifted from anger to something calculated and cruel. "You think anyone will believe you? You think you can make accusations against me and walk away unscathed? I've been at this hospital for 17 years. I bring in $15 million in surgical revenue annually. You're a nurse who's been here 3 months. If you try to make trouble, I'll bury you. I'll make sure you never work in a reputable hospital again. That's not a threat, Emma. That's reality." "We'll see about that," Emma said and walked out. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely stop the recording, but she'd gotten it. Every threat, every manipulation, every word that proved exactly what he was. She texted Sarah, "I'm out. I have it." Then she went home, backed up the recording to 3 different locations, and emailed it to Patricia Morgan. Patricia called her first thing the next morning. "This is excellent work, Emma. We have him. The question now is whether you want to handle this through the hospital's internal processes first or go straight to external authorities. What do you recommend?" "Typically, I'd say try internal first. Establish that you made a good faith effort to resolve this through proper channels. But given what Jessica Tran told you about how the hospital handled her complaint, I don't trust them to do the right thing. They'll probably try to sweep this under the rug to protect themselves from liability. So what's the alternative?" We file complaints simultaneously with the hospital HR, the state medical board, and the EEOC. We make it very clear that this is documented, that you have legal representation, and that you're not going to be silenced or intimidated. The multi-pronged approach means they can't just handle it quietly internally. Emma took a breath. This was the point of no return. Once she filed these complaints, everything would change. Dr. Holloway would know she'd gone to war. The hospital would close ranks. Her colleagues would take sides. Her name would be attached to this forever. But on the other side of that fear was something more important: justice, accountability, the end of Dr. Holloway's ability to prey on vulnerable employees, protection for Megan and every nurse who came after her. "Let's do it," Emma said. Patricia drafted the complaints over the weekend, and on Monday morning they filed everything simultaneously. By noon, Emma had been called into a meeting with the hospital's HR director, a stern woman named Carol Peterson, and the chief operating officer. Carol's expression was carefully neutral. "Ms. Rodriguez, we've received your complaint against Dr. Holloway. These are very serious allegations. I want you to know that St. Catherine's has a zero-tolerance policy for harassment, and we take all complaints seriously." Emma had heard these words before in Jessica Tran's story. This was where the hospital would promise an investigation, then let it quietly die. But this time was different. This time, Emma had preparation. "I appreciate that," Emma said calmly. "I've documented everything thoroughly, and I have evidence that corroborates every allegation. I also want you to know that I've filed complaints with the State Medical Board and the EEOC, and I'm represented by attorney Patricia Morgan. We're prepared to pursue this through every available channel." The COO's expression tightened. "That's unfortunate. We prefer to handle these matters internally." "I'm sure you do. But given that this hospital failed to act when Jessica Tran reported similar behavior 3 years ago, I don't have confidence in the internal process." Carol and the COO exchanged glances. The mention of Jessica's name had clearly rattled them. They probably thought that complaint had been buried deep enough that no one would ever connect the dots. "We'll need to conduct a thorough investigation," Carol said finally. "That will include interviewing Dr. Holloway, reviewing any evidence, and speaking with potential witnesses. During this time, we ask that you not discuss this matter with other employees. I won't discuss it beyond what's legally necessary, but I will not be silenced, and I will not be intimidated." The meeting ended with vague promises to take this seriously and follow all proper procedures. Emma left feeling like she'd just painted a target on her back, but also feeling something she hadn't felt in months: powerful. The hospital's investigation began slowly, hindered by what Patricia called institutional reluctance. They clearly didn't want to find Dr. Holloway guilty of anything, because doing so would open them up to massive liability, not just for Emma's case, but for their failure to act on previous complaints. But Emma had done her homework. She'd gathered evidence they couldn't dismiss, and she'd made the situation public enough that they couldn't make it disappear. The turning point came when Patricia tracked down the resident who'd complained about Dr. Holloway 5 years ago. Her name was Dr. Alicia Martinez, and she was now an attending physician at a hospital in Boston. She'd left St. Catherine's after her complaint went nowhere, but she'd kept her documentation. When Patricia explained what Emma was doing, Alicia agreed to provide a statement. "I reported him twice," Alicia told them on a video call. "Once to my program director, who told me I was being too sensitive. Once to HR, who did a joke of an investigation and concluded it was a misunderstanding. He cornered me in a call room during a 30-hour shift and made it very clear what he wanted from me. When I refused, my evaluations tanked, my surgical opportunities dried up, and I was counseled about my interpersonal skills. I left because staying meant my residency would be destroyed." With Alicia's testimony added to Emma's evidence, Patricia went back to the hospital with an expanded complaint, and a barely veiled threat of a lawsuit that would expose a pattern of institutional negligence spanning years. That was when things finally started moving. The hospital brought in an external investigator, a former federal prosecutor who specialized in workplace misconduct cases. Her name was Margaret Reeves, and unlike the internal HR team, she wasn't interested in protecting the hospital's reputation. She was interested in facts. Margaret interviewed Emma for 4 hours, going through every incident chronologically, listening to the recordings, reading the text messages, reviewing the documentation Emma had kept. Then she interviewed Sarah, who corroborated Emma's distress and the change in her behavior after the harassment began. She interviewed other nurses who admitted, reluctantly, that they'd heard rumors about Dr. Holloway being too friendly with female staff, but had never seen anything concrete. Then Margaret did something neither Emma nor the hospital expected. She requested all of Dr. Holloway's personnel files going back 10 years, including any complaints or concerns ever raised about his conduct, and she demanded access to the hospital's security camera footage. This was when Emma learned about the cameras. St. Catherine's had upgraded their security system 2 years ago, installing high-definition cameras throughout the hospital, including in all corridors. Footage was kept on rolling servers for 90 days before being archived. Margaret requested footage from the 4th floor for the dates Emma had documented interactions with Dr. Holloway in hallways and near the supply rooms. The security footage became the smoking gun. Grainy black and white video doesn't lie. The cameras captured Dr. Holloway following Emma into the supply room, standing too close, touching her lower back as she tried to leave. They captured the hallway conversation with Megan, showing his body language, how he positioned himself, the way Megan had looked uncomfortable before Emma interrupted. Most damningly, they captured the night Emma went to his office, showing her entering with the door slightly ajar, and Dr. Holloway himself closing it fully after she came in. Paired with the audio recording of what was said inside, it created an irrefutable narrative. Margaret also found the paper trail the hospital had tried to bury. Jessica Tran's complaint was in the files, along with notations that the matter had been resolved with no findings of wrongdoing. Alicia Martinez's complaint was there too, with similar language. There was even a complaint from a surgical tech 8 years ago that had been dismissed as personality conflict. A pattern became undeniable. 3 weeks into the investigation, Margaret submitted her report to the hospital board. Emma never saw the full document, but Patricia, who demanded and received a copy as Emma's legal representative, told her it was damning. Margaret had concluded that Dr. Holloway had engaged in sustained sexual harassment, had abused his position of authority to intimidate and threaten employees, and that the hospital had been negligent in its duty to provide a safe workplace by failing to properly investigate previous complaints. The board called an emergency meeting. Dr. Holloway, confident that his status would protect him, attended with his attorney. Emma was invited to attend with Patricia. The scene in that conference room was what we saw. At the very beginning of this story, the moment justice finally caught up with power. When the security footage played, showing Dr. Holloway's behavior in the hallway, his face drained of color. When Margaret played the audio recording of his threats in the office, his attorney started packing up his briefcase. There was no defense for what was on that recording, no way to spin, "I'll bury you, and you'll never work in a reputable hospital again," as anything other than retaliation and intimidation. The board chairman's voice was ice. "Dr. Holloway, this board has seen enough. We'll be recommending immediate termination for cause, and we'll be reporting this matter to the state medical board, the police, and the district attorney's office. You're suspended effective immediately, and security will escort you from the building." Dr. Holloway tried to speak to defend himself, but his attorney put a hand on his arm and shook his head. There was nothing to say. The evidence was overwhelming. His career at St. Catherine's was over. As security escorted him out, Emma watched the man who'd terrorized her walk past the nurse's station where she'd spent months afraid, past the office where he'd threatened her, past all the places where he'd wielded his power like a weapon. He didn't look powerful anymore. He looked like what he was, a predator who'd finally been caught. Sarah hugged Emma in the hallway afterward, both of them crying with relief and exhaustion and the strange emptiness that comes after a battle you weren't sure you'd survive. "You did it," Sarah whispered. "You actually did it." But Emma knew the fight wasn't entirely over. Termination was just the beginning. The real consequences would take months to unfold, and she intended to see them through to the end. The state medical board launched a formal investigation based on the hospital's report and Margaret's findings. Medical licensing boards don't take allegations of sexual misconduct lightly, especially when there's documented evidence and a pattern of behavior. Dr. Holloway's license was suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. For a surgeon, that suspension was a career death sentence. Every day without privileges meant skills atrophying, professional networks dissolving, reputation crumbling. The district attorney's office reviewed the case for potential criminal charges. While sexual harassment is typically a civil matter, the DA determined that Dr. Holloway's threats constituted criminal intimidation and potentially extortion under Pennsylvania law. He was charged with multiple misdemeanors related to his conduct. The charges were serious enough to make headlines, and once the story went public, 2 more former St. Catherine's employees came forward with their own stories of harassment by Dr. Holloway. Emma filed a civil lawsuit against both Dr. Holloway and St. Catherine's Medical Center. The lawsuit alleged sexual harassment, hostile work environment, retaliation, and negligence on the hospital's part for failing to act on previous complaints. Patricia was clear about the goal, not just financial compensation for Emma, but institutional accountability. The hospital, facing massive liability and public relations disaster, moved quickly to settle. They agreed to pay Emma a significant sum, enough to cover her legal fees, compensate for her emotional distress, and provide financial security while she decided her next steps. More importantly, they agreed to implement sweeping policy changes. St. Catherine's created a new zero-tolerance policy for harassment with clear reporting procedures and mandatory third-party investigations for any complaints involving senior staff. They implemented annual harassment training for all employees, including physicians, with an emphasis on power dynamics and professional boundaries. They established an anonymous hotline managed by an external service, so employees could report concerns without fear of internal retaliation. They created a victim advocate position within HR, whose sole job was to support employees who reported misconduct and ensure they weren't subjected to retaliation. And they publicly acknowledged their failure to protect employees like Emma, Jessica, and Alicia, apologizing for the institutional failures that had allowed Dr. Holloway to continue his behavior for years. For Emma, the months after Dr. Holloway's termination were complicated. She'd won, but winning had cost her. The stress of the investigation had taken a physical toll. She'd lost weight, struggled with anxiety, and had nightmares about the confrontation in his office. She started seeing a therapist who specialized in workplace trauma, and slowly, with professional help and the support of friends like Sarah, she began to heal. The hospital administration offered her any position she wanted in any department. Some of her colleagues treated her like a hero. Others whispered that she'd ruined a good man's career, that she'd overreacted, that she should have handled it quietly. Those whispers hurt, but Emma learned to tune them out. She'd done the right thing, and the people whose opinions mattered knew that. She decided to stay at St. Catherine's, working in the cardiac unit where it had all happened. It would have been easier to leave, to start fresh somewhere without the memories, but Emma refused to be driven out of a job she loved by a man who no longer had any power over her. Staying was its own act of defiance, its own reclamation of space. 6 months after Dr. Holloway's termination, the medical board issued their ruling, permanent revocation of his medical license. The formal decision cited the credible evidence of sexual harassment, abuse of power, conduct unbecoming of a physician, and failure to maintain professional boundaries. Dr. Marcus Holloway would never practice medicine again. His decades of accomplishments, his research, his surgical innovations, none of it mattered compared to the lives he damaged through his abuse. The criminal case resulted in a plea deal. Dr. Holloway pled guilty to misdemeanor charges and received probation, mandatory counseling, and a permanent record. It wasn't prison time, but it was public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, which mattered more than people might think. His name was now permanently associated with his crimes, not just his achievements. Emma followed his trajectory through updates from Patricia and occasional Google searches. Dr. Holloway tried to rebuild his life, moving to a different state, but his reputation followed him. Medical communities talk. When hospitals ran background checks, they found the license revocation, the criminal record, the news articles about the scandal. He tried working in medical consulting, but companies didn't want the liability of employing someone with his history. The last Emma heard, he was teaching high school biology in a small town, a job that was respectable but a far cry from the prestige and power he'd once wielded. Emma found herself becoming an unexpected advocate. She started speaking at nursing conferences about workplace harassment, about the importance of documentation and reporting, about how to navigate hostile work environments when speaking up feels impossible. She volunteered with organizations that supported healthcare workers facing misconduct. She took calls from nurses around the country who reached out after hearing her story, offering advice and encouragement. Jessica Tran reached out a year after everything concluded, wanting to thank Emma for finishing what she'd started. They met for coffee, two women who'd survived the same predator and found healing in shared understanding. Alicia Martinez sent Emma a handwritten note. "Thank you for being brave enough to see it through. You save people I'll never meet, and that matters more than you know." As Emma sits in the cardiac unit nurses stationed 2 years later, charting on a routine post-op patient, she sometimes thinks about how different her life might have been if she'd stayed silent. She might have kept her head down, finished her contract, and left St. Catherine's quietly like Jessica had. Dr. Holloway might still be here, his reputation intact, his pattern continuing with new victims. The thought makes her sick, but it also makes her proud of what she chose instead. The fourth-floor hallway looks the same as it did that November evening when everything changed, but Emma walks through it differently now. There's no dread, no looking over her shoulder, no calculating the safest routes to avoid crossing paths with someone who had power over her. The fear is gone, replaced with something stronger, the knowledge that she faced something terrifying and won. Dr. Holloway's name has been removed from all the plaques and donor walls. His successor as chief of cardiothoracic surgery is Dr. Rachel Kim, a brilliant surgeon who's made it clear that respect and professionalism aren't optional in her department. The culture has shifted, slowly but noticeably. Nurses speak up more. Residents report problems without fear. The anonymous hotline gets used, and complaints are taken seriously. St. Catherine's isn't perfect. No institution is, but it's better than it was. That's what justice looks like in the real world, not a complete transformation but meaningful change. Systems that actually protect the vulnerable instead of the powerful, consequences that match the crime, and survivors who can move forward without the weight of silence crushing them. Sarah still works alongside Emma, still brings terrible coffee and makes dark jokes during the hard shifts. But now she also brings nursing students by to meet Emma, introducing her as the nurse who changed everything here. Emma always feels a little embarrassed by that description, but she understands why Sarah does it. Young nurses need to know that speaking up is possible, that systems can be challenged. That power isn't invincible. Megan, the new nurse Emma had protected by interrupting Dr. Holloway's predatory approach, graduated from her orientation program and is now a confident, skilled cardiac nurse. She thanked Emma once, months after everything came out, for stopping something before it could start. "I didn't realize what was happening," Megan admitted. "I just thought he was being nice. If you hadn't interrupted, I might have." She trailed off, but they both knew how that sentence ended. Emma had broken a cycle before it could claim another victim. The medical community is small, and stories travel. Emma hears occasionally about other healthcare workers who have come forward after hearing about the St. Catherine's case, emboldened by the knowledge that justice is possible. She's heard about 3 other hospitals that have implemented similar policy changes, using St. Catherine's new procedures as a model. Every time she hears those stories, she feels the weight of what she went through shift slightly, transmuting from trauma into purpose. Her own healing continues. Therapy helped her process the fear and anger and violation. Time helped her reclaim the joy she'd once felt in nursing. Support from colleagues, friends, and family reminded her she wasn't defined by what Dr. Holloway had done to her. She started dating again, cautiously at first, having to relearn trust. She took a vacation without her phone or laptop, reconnecting with parts of herself that had nothing to do with hospitals or harassment or justice campaigns. She remembered how to laugh without a shadow of dread underneath. And she remembered why she became a nurse in the first place, not to fight predators or change systems, though she'd done both, but to care for people in their most vulnerable moments. That core purpose hadn't changed. Mr. Patterson, the patient from her first rounds with Dr. Holloway, still sends her Christmas cards. Mrs. Liu, whose arrhythmia Emma caught early, credits her with saving her life. Those moments of genuine care, of medical skill meeting human compassion, are what sustain Emma through the hard days. This story, while centered on Emma Rodriguez, is really about something bigger than one nurse and one predator. It's about power structures that protect the wrong people. It's about institutions that prioritize reputation over safety. It's about the courage it takes to speak truth when silence is safer. And it's about the changes that become possible when someone decides that enough is enough. Workplace harassment in healthcare settings is a documented epidemic. Studies show that up to 70% of nurses report experiencing some form of workplace harassment during their careers, and physicians in positions of authority are among the most frequent perpetrators. The power dynamics inherent in medical hierarchies, where doctors outrank nurses, where senior physicians control career opportunities for trainees, where hospital revenue often depends on star surgeons, create environments where abuse can flourish if unchecked. Federal laws like Title VII of the Civil Rights Act protect employees from sexual harassment and retaliation, but laws are only effective when people are willing to use them, and when institutions are willing to enforce them. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission receives tens of thousands of harassment complaints annually, but the vast majority of harassment incidents never get reported. Victims stay silent because they fear retaliation, disbelief, or career destruction. And in too many cases, those fears are justified. That's what makes stories like Emma's important. Every person who reports, who documents, who refuses to be silenced, makes it incrementally easier for the next person. Every institution that implements real consequences and systemic changes makes workplaces safer for everyone. Every predator who faces accountability sends a message that power without limits is no longer acceptable. If you or someone you know is experiencing workplace harassment, please understand these truths. It is not your fault. No one deserves to be harassed, manipulated, threatened, or abused. You have legal rights and protections, regardless of the power imbalance between you and your harasser. Documentation matters immensely. Keep records of dates, times, witnesses, messages, and anything else that can corroborate your experience. You are not alone. Organizations exist to help, including the EEOC for workplace discrimination complaints, state licensing boards for professional misconduct, victim advocacy groups, and legal aid societies if you can't afford an attorney. Speaking up is one of the most courageous things a person can do, and every report, even if it doesn't result in immediate consequences, creates a paper trail that can protect future victims. Emma's story had a resolution because she had evidence, support, and determination. Not every story ends with that level of justice, and that's a systemic failure we need to acknowledge. But incremental progress happens when people refuse to accept the status quo. The medical board that revoked Dr. Holloway's license set a precedent. The hospital policies implemented at St. Catherine's became a model for other institutions. The nurses and residents who watched Emma's case unfold learned that speaking up can lead to change. This isn't just a medical field issue. Workplace harassment occurs across every industry, every profession, every level of power. But healthcare has a particular obligation to do better. An industry built on the principle of first, do no harm, cannot tolerate harm within its own ranks. Patients trust healthcare workers with their lives. Healthcare workers deserve institutions that protect them with the same vigor. 2 years after the conference room confrontation that ended Dr. Marcus Holloway's career, Emma Rodriguez walks through St. Catherine's Medical Center with her head high. She wears her nurse's badge with pride. She mentors new nurses, not just in clinical skills, but in knowing their rights and their worth. She's become the person she needed when she was alone and afraid, living proof that courage and justice aren't abstract concepts but real forces that can reshape lives. Dr. Holloway's legacy is no longer the surgical techniques he developed or the papers he published. His legacy is the lesson that power without accountability is temporary, that evidence and truth can defeat institutional protection, and that victims who find their voices can become agents of profound change. That's not the legacy he wanted, but it's the one he earned through his choices. Emma's legacy is still being written. She's 31 now, with a career ahead of her, with possibilities that extend far beyond the cardiac unit. She's been offered positions in hospital administration, in nursing advocacy organizations, in policy development. She hasn't decided yet what comes next, but she knows that whatever path she chooses, she'll walk it without fear. She'll walk it as a survivor who became a fighter, as a victim who demanded justice, as a nurse who remembered that protecting the vulnerable is the heart of everything healthcare is supposed to be. The fourth-floor hallway at St. Catherine's remains the same physical space, but what it represents has changed. It's no longer the place where Dr. Holloway cornered his victims. It's the place where Emma Rodriguez said no more and meant it. It's the place where security footage captured truth that couldn't be denied. It's the place where power learned that it has limits and consequences have teeth. And that matters. Every changed policy, every protected worker, every predator who faces accountability, every victim who finds the courage to speak, it all matters. Systems change slowly, but they do change when people like Emma refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. This is a story about one nurse's courage, but it's also a challenge to every institution and every person who witnesses wrongdoing. Will you protect the powerful or the vulnerable? Will you perpetuate systems that enable abuse or demand better? Will you stay silent or speak up? Those choices define whether stories like Emma's become more common or whether they remain rare exceptions. Justice in Emma Rodriguez's case wasn't abstract or metaphorical. Justice was a license revoked, a career ended, a predator stopped, policies implemented, and a woman who can go to work without fear. Justice was imperfect and hard-won, but it was real. And real justice, however difficult to achieve, is always worth fighting for. Thank you for watching this story from the Medical Files. Stories like Emma's aren't easy to tell or to hear, but they're essential. They illuminate the darkness where predators hide and remind us that courage, evidence, and persistence can overcome even the most entrenched power structures. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in accountability and systemic change, if you support survivors who refuse to stay silent, subscribe to the Medical Files for more stories that matter. What was your reaction to Emma's decision to gather evidence and report despite the risks? Do you think the consequences Dr. Holloway faced were appropriate? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. This is a space for support, discussion, and collective commitment to safer workplaces for everyone. Next week on the Medical Files, we're exploring a very different kind of story, one about medical innovation, ethical boundaries, and a discovery that forced doctors to choose between career advancement and patient safety. You won't want to miss it. Until next time, remember this: your voice matters, your safety matters, your dignity is not negotiable. No job, no career, no paycheck is worth sacrificing who you are or living in fear. Stand strong, speak truth, and know that when you do, you might just change everything, not only or yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. The Medical Files: real stories, real consequences, real change.